Our next segment is on something else that is supposedly being done for the benefit of black and other marginalized communities, which is the Biden administration has decided it would be a fantastic idea for the sake of equity and diversity to begin handing out free crack pipes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes,
Such cultural enrichment.
This can only go well. So we've got this article from the Free Beacon, although this has been reported on by a number of other publications, saying that the Biden admin to fund crack pipe distribution to advance racial equity. And I'm sure this is going to really help California in particular. California is very well known for its rampant drug use and people defecating on the street, but we'll get into that in a moment. The Biden administration is set to fund the distribution of crack pipes to drug addicts as part of its plans to advance racial equity. The $30 million grant program, I repeat, the $30 million grant program. This is what your taxes are going towards. And if Build Back Better had got through, thank God for Joe Manchin, wasn't it? Blocking it. This is what Biden would mean by Building Back Better, which closed applications Monday and will begin in May. Will provide funds to non-profits and local governments to help make drug use safer for addicts. Let's make drug use safer for addicts. Let's not put a stopper between them and getting the drugs and maybe letting them get clean and sorting their own life out. Let's continue to help them hurt themselves.
Yeah, let's just pave the way for their own self-destruction.
Included in the grant, which is overseen by the Department of Health and Human Services, are funds for smoking kits/supplies. A spokesperson for the agency told the Washington Free Beacon that these kits will provide pipes for users to smoke crack cocaine, crystal methamphetamine, and any illicit substance. Anything you can get your hand on. A bit of gravel off the ground, give that a little smoke.
What were they smoking to come up with this as a policy?
Well, I assume that maybe Hunter Biden had a hand in this. He's like, I've got a great idea, guys. This is going to be pretty radical, but you're going to have to roll with me. HHS said that the kits aim to reduce the risk of infection when smoking substances with glass pipes, which can lead to infections through cuts and sores. Do you know what else is very negative and can lead to infections and other such issues, physical or mental or anything really? It's doing drugs, smoking crack, snorting cocaine, injecting heroin.
Or even immersing yourself in the culture at all.
Yes. Applicants for the grants are prioritised if they treat a majority of the undeserved communities, including African Americans and LGBTQ plus persons. What are you saying about black Americans and gay culture there, Biden? You saying they might indulge a little bit more in drugs than other subcultures? Isn't
this a legitimate case of class genocide? As in, actually?
You could actually make the claim, you could make the argument.
How do we get the drug addicts off the bill? Just give them more drugs.
The problem will sort itself out. Gee, this is that Mitchell and Webb sketch where it's like, well, we need to eliminate poverty. Have we tried killing the poor? Not that we would actually kill the poor, but let's run the simulation.
Would it work on principle?
Yeah,
Someone's taken that idea too seriously.
As established under President Joe Biden's executive order on advancing racial equity. Democratic-run cities such as San Francisco and Seattle have distributed smoking kits to residents in the past. Some local governments, however, have in recent years backed away from their smoking kit programs over concerns that they enable drug abuse.
You don't say.
Yes, I wonder if it's looking at cities like San Francisco and like Seattle and going, holy crap, look at what they've done to themselves. Let's not do that. And who could have seen this one coming, eh?
Or maybe they've had a red-pilled moment and they thought, why is the government giving me drugs to take?
The government generally doesn't have good intentions in mind half the time.
No.
But Louisville, Kentucky, for example, allowed convenience stores to sell smoking kits. So you could just pop down your local corner shop and grab yourself a crack pipe for free. But later banned them. Legislators in Maryland ditched their distribution plan after facing backlash from local law enforcement and African-American leaders. And I think this is a very important thing to bring up, which is that the black communities that they're referring to, these African-American communities, are the ones most negatively affected by this kind of legislation and by these kinds of administrative choices, because they're the ones that have to live with the repercussions of seeing drug use enabled by the government. This kind of mollycoddling and drug use does not help anybody, and this is actually originally why, because obviously this is all operating under a critical race theory perspective and framing, this is why, if you're going to take one of their great examples of how the system is systemically evil and racist, is not an accurate example, that being the crack cocaine sentencing laws. Because, of course, they always like to bring up that crack cocaine gets harsher sentences than the use of normal cocaine. And crack cocaine is used more often by black people than normal cocaine, which is used more often by white people. And they use this as an example where they can go, see, you're just punishing black people. The reason that those laws were passed in the first place was because it was black leaders of those communities who saw the damage that the drug trade was doing on the community, saw that these kids were easily getting their hands on crack cocaine, ruining their lives as a result of it, and petitioned the government to do something about it. And that's what they did about it.
So it corresponded, ironically, to the lived experience of a black person.
I know, but we don't listen to those unless they're saying what we want them to say.
Oh, of course. Forgive me.
Sergeant Clyde Boatwright, president of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police, said government resources are better spent on preventing drug abuse than making it safer. If we look at more of a preventative campaign as opposed to an enabling campaign, because if you're going to talk about behaviour, this is enabling behaviour. This is the sort of thing that your school teachers tell you not to do with your friends. Don't peer pressure and enable people. I think it will offer an opportunity to have safer communities with fewer people who are dependable on those substances.
Fewer people, yeah.
Yeah, there will, but it's a radical thought. Maybe don't give drug addicts more drugs. It'll help them. Great idea. Funding for the Harm Reduction Grant Program is provided through Democrats' American Rescue Plan, which the Senate passed along party lines after Vice President Kamala Harris, who cares so much about black communities and black prisoners in particular, cast a tie-breaking vote. Other equipment that qualifies for funding includes syringes, vaccinations, disease screening condoms, and fentanyl strips. The grant program will last 3 years and includes 25 awards of up to $400,000. An HHS spokesperson declined to specify what is included in the smoking kits. Similar distribution efforts provide mouthpieces to prevent glass cuts, rubber bands to prevent burns, and filters to minimize the risk of disease. How about instead of making it easier to do drugs, you just make it more difficult for these people to do drugs?
Yes, and you
so
double
they're not
down
ruining their lives with it.
Yeah, you double down on its circulation, impose stricter.
And as always, because everything is illegal unless the government's doing it, it is against federal law to distribute or sell drug paraphernalia unless authorised by the government. That's good to know, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
That's great to know. Everything's illegal unless the government does it. Taxes, please. And they add in a nice little thing to end on here, which is that President Biden's son Hunter is a long-time user of crack cocaine, just to throw that in there as one of the reasons they might be doing this. But yes, this is what Build Back Better was going to fund. And we've got another article here talking about why they're handing out the free crack pipes. The purpose of the program is to support community-based overdose prevention programs, syringe service programs, and other harm reduction services, the document said. The funding will be used for prevention activities to help control the spread of infectious diseases and the consequences of such diseases for individuals with or at risk of developing substance use disorders. Stop people doing drugs and getting addicted to them by making it easier for them to do drugs.
Yeah, this is getting into Brave New World territory now, isn't it?
Yes, take your soma and shut up.
Yes.
Is what the government is telling you right there. Here's your free drugs, here's your reparations, now leave us alone, pleb. One of the requirements for recipients of grant funding is to purchase equipment and supplies to enhance harm reduction efforts. Great, but as I've made reference to, there are human consequences to these kinds of sweeping legislative ideas and actions, and one of them being that in America alone, drug overdoses are a bit expensive to everybody. So this is an article on Yahoo News taken from ABC News. Overdose deaths cost the US $1 trillion annually, bipartisan report finds. Now, I need to point out that in this article, it doesn't point out the specific ways that it's costing people, but it might be potentially lost funds in businesses, lost funds from consumers being able to buy things because they're spending them on drugs instead. It could be the strain that it puts on the medical care system, because people who overdose on drugs end up going to hospital. And if they're overdosing on drugs, it might be their families left to foot the bill who might not be able to afford it, or they might just die. Who knows if they've got family, they're just a drug addict, and then nobody foots that bill. So, the drug overdose epidemic in the United States, now primarily driven by synthetic opioids like ultra-deadly fentanyl, I find it funny here as well, by the way, that they're finally admitting that fentanyl's quite deadly.
Yeah.
Interesting that they chose not to do that during a particular case last year or try to obfuscate it a little bit. Costs the nation roughly $1 trillion a year, according to new bipartisan congressional reports released on Tuesday. A White House Council of Economic Advisors assessment pegged the cost of the opioid crisis at $700 billion 3 years ago. The new report derives the new $1 trillion estimate based on the increase in overdose deaths seen since 2018. Drug overdose deaths have more than doubled in recent years, from about 44,000 in 2013 to more than 100,000 between May 2020 and April 2021. Overdose incidents are responsible for more deaths in the US each year than firearms, suicide, homicide, or car crashes, according to the report. So let's restrict people's access to firearms. Let's restrict people's, let's just restrict people's access to firearms. That'll stop people killing themselves and dying more often. But at the same time, let's make it easier to get drugs.
Let's just subsume their freedom as people into just an endless cycle of drug taking and drug recovery.
Yes, this is not going to help anybody. You give people the access to more drugs and the ability to do them more easily, and the obvious answer is obvious, you idiots.
It's almost as if they want to subsume the entire population to a culture of endless passivity.
But you don't understand, Tom. You don't understand it. This is all part of the plan to equalize Americans of all shapes and sizes and all colours, because Biden had an executive order on racial equity that he signed last year that's been referred to in here. So in this amazing document, you can read such things as systemic racial disparities in education negatively impact learning outcomes for black students, and many face persistent gaps in reading and mathematics achievements. So let's turn their parents into crack addicts.
That's really going to help them, isn't it?
Yes, this will really help. Perhaps holding students and black citizens in general to similar or if not the same standards as you would anybody else in the country is what's actually going to be most beneficial to them.
Oh no, but seeing them as equal moral agents is racist.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that people can't hold themselves responsible for anything unless they're white.
What's your fragility?
This is my fragility and privilege speaking. Of course. Perhaps instead you should be promoting policies that don't encourage and propagate single-parent households, given that single-parent households are, no matter what race you are, the biggest single indicator of both academic and career-based success that you can see moving forward. If you're born as a white person into a single-parent household, chances are statistically that you're going to do much worse than a black kid raised in a two-parent household. These are just facts, but affirmative action, which Callum and I have covered recently, might be getting repealed a little bit soon, fingers crossed, has for a long time encouraged people to engage in the sort of practices that lead to single-parent households, including, for instance, I believe it's if you are unmarried with kids, then you get 2 welfare checks. If you're married, you only get the 1 welfare check. And what's it easier to do if you're not married? It's easier to just leave.
Yes.
Because you've got no legal repercussions for it. Increasing, and it goes on, they want to increase general understanding of systemic causes of educational challenges faced by many black students, whether these students are in urban, suburban, rural, or migrant learning environments, and working across executive departments and agencies to address these challenges. So nothing about actually improving educational standards or encouraging a good learning environment or anything. Just teaching the children to see themselves as oppressed because of their skin colour. Teaching them to look across the room and see a white student and go, "You're better than me, therefore I hate you." I mean, if you want to talk about encouraging particularly negative cultural attitudes, teaching a particular class of person to see themselves as being oppressed by everybody else is going to lead to some pretty negative results, as we have seen.
Yes.
And all of this doesn't really address any of those subcultural problems in the first place. You can't just bring in big daddy government to come and solve everything for you. As Milton Friedman has said, the government solution is often worse than the problem itself, as we've seen from things like affirmative action. All the government had to do was repeal all of the discriminatory laws from Jim Crow. They did that, but then they added loads of positive discrimination laws, which have encouraged the subcultural issues that we've seen in America since the late 1960s, moving on forward into the times that we're in now.
Perpetuated the racial divisions that we should be trying to resolve.
Yeah, and it just leads to special interest groups begging and pushing for benefits and creating basically national incidents at this point. When you look at the George Floyd riots from a few years ago, if we'd like to move along. So Biden's racial equity policies focus of public the webinar on Thursday. This is from SF Gate, talking about how in the wake of the one-year anniversary of President Joe Biden's executive order on advancing racial equity, a coalition of advocacy groups is pushing for the administration to redouble its commitment to sweeping policy changes. So no matter what you do, no matter what you say that you're going to do, it's never going to be enough because you have let these people, let the special interests, these pressure groups, get their foot in the door, and they have realized, hold up, we can put pressure on for benefits. Whether or not it will actually benefit people's lives, either spiritually or materially, these figureheads of the movements, as we've seen from Patrisse Cullors from BLM, are able to position themselves very nicely to receive a hefty chunk of the pie and then retire into obscurity where they won't be hounded for the rest of their life because I made my money advancing racial equity. Policy Link and Race Forward, national non-profit organisations that advocate for social justice and racial equity policies, will host a webinar Thursday to review the Biden administration's performance over the past year. This event, dubbed Racial Equity, the whole of government responsibility, so the government is responsible for you living a good life, is what they're telling you, will also include a discussion of the recent report Advancing Racial Equity in Year 2 of the Biden administration, which outlines ways in which the federal government can further develop policies to address systemic racism and discrimination. This is the start of a long racial equity journey. I thought the start was like 5 years ago. I thought the start was when BLM originally started in the first place. The start will always be whenever it's most convenient for them. The start will always be now because it will never be allowed to get past the opening line because there will always be something new that they want. This will never end.
They'll always get to change the goalposts on when and what the start point is.
But they hope the administration will build off this foundation and make their commitment to racial equity even more clear and well known. Speakers will address federal policies and how they impact state and local decision making. We really need the federal government to establish standards for racial equity because states across the country have been working at chipping away our rights, which I can only assume means they want me to present an ID before I vote, which is racist.
Oh, of course.
Even though most states give out state IDs for free. And it's really simple. And if you ask a black person on the street, they're not as stupid as the CRT scholars would like you to believe. They know how to get an ID.
But if someone can't bring themselves to go and get an identification card, then surely that's a form of systemic oppression against their tiredness.
It's victimization. The government offices are only open between these hours, and I have to do these other hours of work. Oh, it's terrible. But it's basically just saying, government, give me free stuff.
Yeah,
that's what they want. That's all this ever ends up being, because that's what you do. You put pressure on the government to give you free stuff. And as Callum and I have covered recently, there are other elements of Biden's attempts to create racial equity, including his statement of "Black woman now" for the Supreme Court pick, where Biden, the Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer was retiring, and Biden says he's going to announce his nominee to fill Breyer's seat, and he reiterated his commitment to nominating a black woman to the nation's highest court. Our process is going to be rigorous. That's right, we're going to make sure she is both woman and black enough. I'm going to break out the colour swabs to make sure that I get the right shade to really help my political chances in the next election.
This is so backwards.
It is. It's in a classical sense, being a classical liberal, this is classically racist.
Yeah.
Is this going to be a difference now between neo-racism and classical racism? I may be a neo-racist, but at least I'm not a classical racist. I will select a nominee worthy of Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence and decency. While I've been studying candidates, backgrounds and writings, I have made no decision except one. The person I nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, career, and experience and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court. It's long overdue, in my view. I made the commitment during the campaign for president, and I will keep that commitment, or else I might lose at least 50% of my black voters, is the unspoken sentence at the end of that. And I don't care if you think it's an arbitrarily overdue amount of time before one's there. Let someone get there by merit. I want the best person in the job, not whoever you've decided is appropriate based on their gender and skin colour.
Then it ceases to be an achievement for them, doesn't it? I mean, if anything, that is an expression of you could say implicit racism there, the belief that you don't think that a person of a different colour or race can get there on merit, which is nonsense.
Yeah, and you're just going to be... people suffer from imposter syndrome enough on their day-to-day lives.
Yes.
Imagine being that person. You're on the Supreme Court just because you're a black woman. What kind of insane levels of imposter syndrome would you suffer from? Anyway, just to move on quickly, just to reiterate that this stuff is never enough because the special interest groups will never let it be enough. So progressives have said to Biden on the Supreme Court, having a black woman is not enough. Progressive Democrats have a clear message to Joe Biden for whomever he nominates to the Supreme Court. Nominating a black woman is not enough. Who could have seen this one coming? Democrats from the left flank of Biden's party are beginning to lay out their demands for what type of person they want to replace the justice. We want somebody who's going to be reflective of the needs of working families and understands that we're moving toward an oligarchy in this country and their corporate interests with enormous power, said Senator Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, not burnt standards.
So what we need is someone competent.
Yes. I didn't mention any names, but I think we need this Supreme Court justice who understands enormous economic pressures working families are under and understands the incredible power that the masters of the universe, of the universe and corporate interests have over this country, and is prepared to stand up. That's right, He-Man's behind all of this. When asked if he had discussed this with the White House, he said yes, and God bless Bernie Sanders for trying to stay relevant. He's still hanging in there for some reason.
Yeah, there is something kind of base in what he's saying. That in this sense, he's trying to point out, or at least not consciously, but he's basically saying that it's...
he's trying to apply class principles to the nomination rather than CRT-based race principles.
In his statement, there is an argument that employing people on the ground, giving someone a position on the basis of race is a bad idea. What you actually need is someone who understands people in these... In those particular positions that he's alluding to.
But don't you know, AOC has something to say about it as well?
Oh, she always has something to say.
Of course, there is just an absolute abundance of legal genius and black women legal genius in this country. So I also think, well, if there's an abundance of black women, surely we've reached parity. Surely we've reached ideal representation. So... there's one of the arguments, BTFO'd. So I also think we need to make sure that the nominee is also administrating the administration's values, that they're pro-Labour, that they will be a champion for voting rights and for the protection of people's ability to vote, and also organise their workplace, among many other things. Environmental issues will also be huge, I imagine. So unless they are the most annoying, virtue-signalling progressive, it does not matter if they are a black woman to AOC. They need to be the right kind of black woman. That basically is just saying there, we don't want Candace Owens. We don't want a Republican, a conservative black woman. They just want their kind who can advance all... They want their Ruth Bader Ginsburg
They basically just want a statist who happens to be black.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. But just to close this off, Biden will continue to virtue signal and still make no one happy because the more you give them what they want, the more they will take from you, almost like a drug addict.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast of the Lotuses, you can go and support us at lotuseaters.com. We don't do any adverts, so that's how we're funded, and you get access to all of our premium content, such as this series of articles by John Wheatley about reading the future in propaganda. I won't spoil it, but like I said, if you like to support us, you can get parts 1, 2, and 3 is now out. If you did find this interesting, you can always congratulate John Wheatley on his excellent analysis on Getter.com. Follow him just at John Wheatley. Thanks very much.